Now, our main focus point today is about a recent development around a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And President Trump has floated this idea, and it's kind of come and gone in the headlines. But, what might it mean for Bitcoin? How likely is it? I think that's the real question. We know it would be big, but how likely is it? Now, this is a proposed plan, and it would make a Bitcoin reserve that would buy a certain amount of Bitcoin each year. This is the Bitcoin Act of 2024, and it would purchase as many as 1 million Bitcoins over a 5-year period, equivalent to 5% of the total circulation of Bitcoin. That's what is being proposed. Now, I don't know if you know this, but the government already ranks as one of the biggest holders of Bitcoin, just simply through seizures, asset seizures and forfeitures. They hold 198,000 Bitcoins. So that is one option here, is that instead, what do you do with this? Do you sell it? It's like it's any other asset that the government seizes. What do they do with it? A lot of times they're returning it to those that were defrauded. But in this case, they could simply just say, hey, this is now our Bitcoin reserve. We're just going to hold it. An asset on the Treasury balance sheet. Could certainly do that. Now, the biggest example of a country buying Bitcoin is actually El Salvador. In 2021, they made it legal tender, and they've been buying aggressively ever since. And they hold about 6,000 Bitcoins. So you think $600 million worth roughly? I think that's a lot, but we have 198,000. So our holdings already pale in comparison to El Salvador. Now, countries like the Czech Republic recently suggested that the bank might start buying Bitcoin. And there's a game theory to this. If one big country goes and buys it, then others might jump on here. The question, though, is this really the direction that the country with the biggest reserve, with the world's reserve currency, wants to go? Think of our ability to spend money, to finance our debts, our deficits. Trump is pushing back on a lot of spending right now with Doge, but we all know that needs to be legislated to some degree in order to make that set in stone. You can hold back payments for so long, but lawsuits happen and goes through the courts, etc. And Trump has his own ideals of how to spend money. Taxes is one. And certainly getting to a point where you don't need to issue any more debt is probably very unlikely. So going out there and undermining the strength of your own currency by endorsing another currency that you don't control seems somewhat unlikely to me. And there's no real template for this to follow. Yeah, you have El Salvador, like I said, but that's a small country that's somewhat desperate and needed a shakeup to help strengthen their country. And to their credit, it's worked. Now, Trump has already backed away from what he characterizes as the Bitcoin reserve. Instead, he's now calling it the National Digital Asset Stockpile. And here's another way that the government will be spending, right? You have to spend it. What is Bitcoin worth? It's a dollar exchange. You're spending dollars to buy this other asset when they're trying to actively cut spending, when they're actively trying to cut spending so that they can cut taxes. So, the big question is, how much was this campaign rhetoric to get kind of the Bitcoin crowd excited? And how much follow through will there really be? I err on the side of it's probably not going to be as big as the Bitcoin maxis hope. It'll probably be something along the lines of, hey, we have this 198,000. This is part of our sovereign wealth fund. And he already floated that. Remember the sovereign wealth fund a few days ago? Talked about building one of those. Let's just put those Bitcoins in our sovereign wealth fund. Maybe use some of them to buy harder assets, physical assets, real estate, right? He's a real estate guy. Would he rather spend money on acquiring Greenland, for example, or more Bitcoin? Probably more Greenland. So I think this is pretty low on the priority list for the new administration. They have a lot of other priorities to focus on. But I don't rule it out. I don't rule it out because we know Trump is a wild card. But the question you have to ask yourself is how much is already built into the price. Now, Bitcoin has been declining as of late. It's weakening, kind of hanging around the 95,000 mark. I've said before, breaks below 90,000, then I think you're headed for a big drawdown in Bitcoin. But right now, just kind of hanging out, consolidating.